Welcome everybody. I know we've got some folks coming in. As you are trickling in, feel free to, let me make sure this chat is up and running and seeing, yeah, so everyone should be able to use the chat feature down there at the bottom. If you want to, if you feel like chiming in, let us know where you're coming from today and what your affiliation is. So if you're a graduate of the university, a current student, or just a really good friend of the university, let us know and we'll get started in just a minute. Okay, I'm sorry. I was just told that chat is disabled. I'm really sorry about that, everyone. I'm not sure what's going on with that. You would think that at this point we would have Zoom all figured out, but it looks okay on my end, but I'm not sure what's going on. Regardless, I'm really happy that everyone is here, and in the interest of time, we will go ahead and get started. And so we'll go ahead and dive into stuff. This is, hopefully going to be interactive webinar. So if you've got, any questions for me, again, the Q&A is where I'd want you to put that. So thanks again for joining me. We're going to be talking about telling your story. So if you're here, you've probably taken a career break, maybe currently still on a break and thinking about getting back into the workforce, or maybe you've been trying, but it's not going as well as you wanted it to. So here to help you get started on that journey, or maybe sort of reflect on what you've done so far and see if there's any places where you might want to refresh stuff. So really quickly, Becca Shelton, if we have not had a chance to meet yet, I am a career advisor in the office here at the University of Richmond, and my purpose here in the office is to work with alumni, which of course you get career services free for life. And my next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of those resources are and what that means for you. So if you're a newcomer to career services and you're alumni, thank you so much for joining us. I've been doing this for a while now, been here 4.5 years, and I've really enjoyed my work. The other population that I work with on campus is all of our grad students. So anybody in the School of Professional Continuing Studies, which we call SPCS, or our MBA program. So all of those folks that I work with, which means that I work with a lot of experienced professionals and people that are returning to work, or like you, maybe taking a career break. So again, this is what we'll be covering today. I'm going to try really hard to wrap it up by 1 o'clock to respect everybody's time. But again, if you've got questions, please put those in the Q&A, and I will certainly get to them. I do have a couple places in here to pause for questions, but if you've got them on your mind, go ahead and pop them in the chat. So again, all of our alumni get, when you graduate from any program here at the university, no matter what school that's from, you get career services free for life. And that's kind of an anomaly. It's kind of a rarity in the world of higher education. Many institutions, you either pay for career services, or it's, you maybe get, say the first year after graduation, you can access career services, and after that, you can't. But that's one of the really great benefits and luxuries of being at a smaller institution like the University of Richmond, and the fact that we have the ability to staff that. So that means free for life. It means that we will never put a limit on how many times we can meet, and we will never charge you for career services. And all of the events that I do are for free, all of the one-on-one appointments as well. There are a lot of things, if you wanted to reach out for me for an advising appointment, a lot of things that we can cover. I do work with many of our adult learners, as well as, again, our graduates who are in all places of their career journey. So that's the young professionals to the folks that have been in the industries for a while. And so we can talk about a lot of different things, no matter what place you're in. I know that you all are probably here for an express reason, but if you're ever thinking about switching careers, or if you want to talk about job search strategy, so looking at cover letters and resumes, the networking piece, the application process, if it's been a while since you've looked for a job, with a lot of the advent of technology and the way that that's changed, certainly the application process is different than what you might be used to. We can also do mock interviews. So there's a lot of stuff. If you're interested in having an appointment, again, I'd be happy to chat. We do have a new platform that we picked up last year. It's called Handshake. If you haven't heard about it, and if that's foreign to you, or you just have questions about how to get in, please just send me an email and I'll be happy to walk you through that step. Some of the resources that you have over there, again, the link, and I'll send the slides out afterwards as well. The link there is for the YouTube page is for the alumni relations page. And if you didn't know, we record all of our webinars, and all of my stuff is recorded. I do have sort of a host of stuff on there. It's on the channel on their page, and it's all of my past stuff if you're curious about anything else that I've done. For our grad students on campus, I do send out monthly newsletters, and then we've got a bunch of other resources as well if you're interested. So just want to give you guys a brief overview of that stuff before we get into the content. So I always like to start off a little bit about, why do we need one? So if you're here today, you're either have been maybe having trouble with this part of stuff, or you're interested in, okay, I definitely am trying to get back into the workforce, but I'm not really sure where to start. I have been doing career advising I've been in the industry for 13 years. I've worked with undergrads, again, all the way through experienced professionals. And I think the one thing that I usually see is that when people are either career switching, or again, like getting back into the workforce, one of the things that sort of always falls by the wayside is figuring out how to talk about your story, right? Like, how do you tell that? No matter who you're talking to, if you're in an interview, if you're trying to write a cover letter, our stories really matter. It doesn't, yes, might be interviewing for a job, and that feels very nerve-wracking and high pressure, but the person on the other end of that interview is still a person, right? Like, we're all human, and we crave that connection piece. And so I think, putting the human back into, the humanity back into why are you getting back into the workforce, that part of your story really matters, right? And there's always a balance, and we'll talk about stuff in a little bit. But we are just all very human. And I think if we can try to make this more genuine for other people to understand, that's going to create a much better connection that will certainly help you be remembered in the interview or the application process. And the other thing too is a lot of folks in your situation, you might be feeling some pressure from other areas of your life. Okay, well, I've got to get a job, or I'm just going a little bit, like, wow, this is really not for me, right? Like, taking a career break, I need to be busy, I need to be working and doing something. And that can, trickle down and make us feel like, okay, well, I just need to get some applications out there, right? Like, this is really important, so I just need to do this and hustle. The one thing that I usually see missing from folks who come to talk to me, because everybody wants to start with a resume, is they have forgotten to think about why. How do you explain that to yourself? Or how do you explain that to other people, right? Your story. I always like to share, because I've learned all of my life lessons the hard way. And so I always like to share the embarrassing stories for myself, so you can feel a little bit better about yourself. I will always very clearly remember one time it was luckily not a formal interview for a position, but I was having an informational interview with a VP, and he asked me one question, why was I here talking to him, and what did I want to do? And I was in a very vulnerable state, and I was not ready, apparently, to talk about that. And he was very kind to me, but it could have ended really horribly if I'd had anybody else on the other end of that table for me. And so that was my wake up call to, okay, I think I think that I need to get my story together, practice this, and feel really comfortable and confident about it, because that's the, my goal is I hope you're not in a situation like I was, where somebody asks you an innocent question and you are unprepared. So my goal is to help you leave here today feeling good and confident about telling your story, and in a way that will make sense to other people. And the other thing too is, people will always assume things, right? And so part of the hiring process, right, when you're getting back into the workforce, is getting in front of your story, because if you don't tell your story, somebody else will, or they will assume things. It's probably not going to be it's probably not going to be the truth for you, right? So, again, like, if you're here, you're probably on a break. And this probably all makes sense to you. You probably either have experienced this yourself or know people who have. People take breaks for a lot of reasons. I think the really great thing to remember in today's day and age, when I started in career services years ago, the attitude was very different from people taking career breaks. And as a matter of fact, the term career break is kind of newish. People used to call it, gaps. How do you explain the gap in your resume? But people take career breaks for a lot of reasons, and recruiters and companies are many of them. I can't speak for all of them, but many of them are recognizing that this is much more common, and that the workforce is a bit more fluid than it used to be. And so as a result of that, many people are a bit more understanding about people who are interviewing and job searching who have taken breaks. So I think that you might, and I hope this is the case, right? Like, I hope that you experience a bit more people on the other end of that interview that are understanding of what's going on, right? It doesn't mean that you can not explain it, but it does mean that, I think you might have an audience that is more accepting of what has been going on, right? So, of course, like sabbatical, some people are very fortunate to have an intentional leave from work, where they can focus on personal, professional growth. And if that's you, that is wonderful. I applaud you, and I think that's a fantastic thing to do. Some people take breaks for family leave, right, to raise kids. And some people are in the unfortunate situation of perhaps a layoff where it wasn't necessarily your choice. Or to manage medical issues, to either care for family members or to manage medical issues of your own. And again, people are much more are understanding of this, right? And what really matters here is how you talk about this. And that's what we're going to get into in just a few minutes. And I think my next slide is a pause for questions. So if you've got any, throw them in the Q&A. But again, really what you should be focusing on here is, positivity. You set the tone. You set the tone for the conversation here. And so don't forget that, please. So it really, how you talk about this really matters. If you're talking about it in, a very ho-hum way, or you're sort of downplaying stuff, or you're not, talking about the positive side of this, what you've gained. Oh, I had to do this, right? Your tone really matters. So I do, in whatever you sort of practice and come up with, I think it's really important to remember the words that you use and the impression and tone that they give. When you're thinking about how are you talking about this, recognizing your growth in this time. Maybe the reason that you took a career break was not your choice, or maybe it wasn't something that it was a hard choice. You didn't necessarily want to, but it was necessary. Remember to focus on how were you able to grow in that? Out of really difficult situations usually comes something positive or a growth opportunity. And so talking about that instead of always focusing on the negative. And, again, focusing on some of the skills that you've gained, if that's been possible for you, and, always bringing it back around and talking about and focusing on your readiness to return to work, because that's why you're there, right? That's why you're applying to the job, or that's why you're in the interview, is because you're ready to return to work, right? And so you telling your story or talking about your career break, say in an interview or a cover letter, that should not be something that takes up a ton of time. But it is important to address it. And so always, give a little explanation and then make sure that you're returning to the purpose of why you're there. Okay, so I'm going to take a sip of water. If anybody's got any questions, throw them in that Q&A and then we'll move on. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so we will move on with our content. And hopefully this part is going to be really helpful for you with some specific suggestions. So when you're thinking about how are you crafting your story, right? And like, how might this come up? Because that's one thing that, practically speaking, how would this come up? So you're thinking about getting back into the workforce, or you're actively pursuing job opportunities, and you're thinking, okay, I know this is an important thing for me to do, but how is this useful? Where can I apply this? Certainly the cover letter, if you're doing a cover letter for applications, might be an opportunity to address this, in a few sentences, or certainly in an interview. And when it comes to interviewing, the interviewer can ask you, it's so hard to tell what they're going to ask, a variety of questions. But certainly one of the most common ones is some variation of, tell me about yourself and why you're interested in this position. In those situations, again, like I was saying in the beginning, I think it's really, really important to make sure that you are getting in front of your story before somebody else does. Because depending on what your situation is, it's probably going to be reflected in your resume and your perhaps another, so they're certainly going to know, okay, they've been out of the workforce for a while, right? So they're going to want you to either address it again, or they will address it themselves, right? Now there are certainly some, when it comes to interviewing, this is a little bit of a sidetrack, excuse me. But when it comes to interviewing, and there's definitely some questions that they are off base and not allowed to ask you. Like say if you had to take a leave from the workforce for, to manage some health issues yourself, or if you sort of got ongoing medical issues and anything that might be by the ADA deemed disability, they're not allowed to ask you specific questions like, can you drive, or things like that. So just keep in mind too, that, they should not be asking you really specific questions about stuff. But that's why you would want to get in front of it, so they can have an understanding of what's going on, and how this is going to be helping you return to the workforce. So a little bit of a sidebar, but I think it's also really important to remember, because I think, a lot of times when we're in the situation and we get in interview settings, we're like, okay, really excited about this interview, man, I really want this job and I need a job like yesterday. And sometimes in those situations, we tend to sort of dismiss things that are inappropriate or illegal. So just don't forget that, there are certain topics that are off base for them because they're just not relevant to the job. So anyway, diving back into crafting your story. So this is where we're going to get a little bit more specific. So what you want to be, here's some things to think about. I love lists, I love bullet points. And so this is sort of how I stay organized with myself. Thinking about first, preparing an explanation, and we'll have some more specifics on the subsequent slides. Being honest to a degree, right? Like they don't need all of the information, they don't need all of the details, but being honest enough so they understand. Filling in the gap for them, keeping it brief, and knowing again when you might need to exit that situation if it gets there, and then practicing is really key and really important. So first of all, preparing for an explanation. You have to excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. So again, employers definitely need to know about what's going on, within reason, of course. It's all a balancing act about what you share and don't share. And again, I think many recruiters are much more, understanding of taking career breaks and the reasons that you might be doing that. So they won't necessarily keep you from getting a job, but again, set the tone and let them know what's been going on. So, but they're definitely going to expect you to address it in some form. If you completely gloss over it, they're going to probably wonder, what else are you hiding? Okay. I love a really good reframe. So really thinking about, how is this a part of my story, right? How does this fit in with my journey about where I've been and where I want to go? Thinking about, what have you gained either personally or professionally, some skills maybe from this time, and how is it helpful in you returning to work? And there's certainly situations where maybe you took time, you took a break to, really focus on raising your family. As a parent myself, there are a lot of skills that you get from that. Babies and toddlers are not easy to manage. And in addition to that, managing any other things that you might be managing in the household, right? And so those are certainly some skills, and it takes just a reframe and how you talk about that really matters. And then practicing, of course, practicing in the mirror. And as somebody who's had to record herself multiple times and watch those again for sort of some self-reflection, watching yourself on recording and hearing your voice, how it is recorded, is not for the faint of heart, but I do highly recommend it, because that's really helpful in knowing how you come across to other people. Practice with family and friends who can give you some honest, constructive feedback instead of just, "You're doing great." Because everybody, they love you, right? They want the best for you. But people who can give you some good constructive feedback, write it down and say it out loud. And I think the most important thing here is to own your story, because it's your story. It's important, and it matters. So be honest was the next thing I want to talk about a little bit. And again, this is important. You can certainly be honest here without oversharing again. And if you're thinking, that sounds great, Becca, obviously I know that I need to be honest. I've got some good examples, because again, as somebody who's been in the job search before for a variety of reasons, really this comes down to brass tacks. So again, they don't need a lot of details, like if you were caring for a sick family member, who was sick, what they were sick with. Those details are not necessarily important, right? They just need to know, I took a break to focus on caring for a family member, and now I'm ready to get back on the workforce, right? And so keep the explanation brief and focus on your readiness again to return to work, right? So like, what was the reason? Tell them without giving a lot of details. What did you do during the break? So again, this would be an area to focus on any growth opportunities that you had, or if you did any reskilling or upskilling, anything that you picked up, or even if it wasn't like any kind of new skills or certifications that you picked up, how did you stay in touch with the industry, right? Or like what you're interested in doing. Did you do any, I like to call it strategic volunteering, right? So like volunteering that was probably hopefully enjoyable for you, but also volunteering that was, gave you some really great skills, right? So like, if you were perhaps, this is a really common example, if you were perhaps, on the PTA at one of your kids' schools, did you maybe work with technology, right? Like, so you could strategically volunteer and do things that would be helpful to whatever you want to do. Did you manage the budget for that? Were you in a leadership position where you managed committees or other people in that volunteer organization, right? Those are all really tangible skills that are applicable in the workforce. And so, focusing on that part of what did you do during the break, if that were the case. If you didn't maybe have the capacity to do any volunteering, what happened in your break that might be, again, a useful skill. Like again, being a parent myself, there are lots of useful skills you can talk about with parenting and managing a household, and the schedules and the being on time, that are very useful in the workforce. And then why are you ready to get back into the workforce? And so again, I think here, keeping it light, making sure that you're staying optimistic and setting the tone for the conversation is really important here. Okay, so I've got a few questions. So I will answer those questions, and then we will move on to the other slides in just a few minutes. So thank you for these. Could you please repeat whether we address the gap in a cover letter or letter of interest? Absolutely, that's a great question. And again, there are plenty of ways or places in which you can address the gap and the career break. And certainly the cover letter is one of those. In the next webinar in this series in 2 weeks from today, I'll certainly be talking about specifics with resumes and cover letters, but definitely using a few sentences, a little bit of space in that cover letter to address that is a good idea, because it's really important to remember that your resume and cover letter, if you're doing cover letter, they are oftentimes, unless you have sort of like an inside referral to that position, oftentimes those documents are your first quote unquote I like to say the first conversation with that employer. That's your first chance to tell them what's going on, right? With you. And even if, so say in the case perhaps of, and I'm getting a little off topic, Cindy, but perhaps in the case that you are not able, like they don't give you room to submit a cover letter, if you have a chance to email the recruiter separately, with a little bit of explanation, or there's even, and I'll do specifics next in 2 weeks, but there might even be an opportunity to specifically address that on your resume. So hopefully that helps to answer that question. The next one, what if the break is not something that a lot of people can relate to, sort of off the beaten path? I mean, that is a really great question there. And certainly, I think breaks happen for everybody for different reasons, and they're oftentimes really personal. And so again, not knowing the specifics here, but I definitely would say maybe some reframe with that and how you're talking about it, focusing on the positive aspects of that without giving a whole lot of detail. I don't know that I've ever met you, the one that asked this question. So if you, if you would like to reach out to me, please send me an email and I would be happy to have a chat with you more specifically about that. But again, I don't think it's anything that you should or need to shy away from or sort of try to sweep under the rug and, dismiss it. But again, I think it just really depends on sort of how you talk about that. And maybe how it's prepared you or your readiness to return to work. The last question here for right now, at least, was what if the reason was mental health? Not excited to share that with a stranger. I don't know many people that are in that situation that would be excited to share that with a stranger. So that's completely understandable. And again, we've got some examples in a little bit to talk about that. And the person that asked this question, I would be happy to chat with you specifically about your situation and how you might address that. But I think, again, that, excuse me, keeping it brief, but giving them an explanation, and this would be what how I might explain this to somebody else is just managing my health, right? Again, they don't need specifics. But what's important to them there is that you took necessary time off to manage your health, that you are in a good place with that now, and that you can manage your health, and that you are ready to return to work, right? Like those are the key important points. And so again, like I think maybe not excited to share that with a stranger, okay. Hopefully you're at a place where you are okay at least sharing, I needed to take time off to manage my health, right? You don't need to tell them what you were diagnosed with. Now, if you do get an offer, and this could be a subsequent conversation, but say if you do get an offer and you accept that offer, and say whatever you might be dealing with, you might need some ADA accommodations, because the definition of a disability is very broad under ADA. That employer is required to give you accommodations, and we can talk specifically about anything that you might need with that. I've certainly worked with some folks in the past who have taken career breaks for mental health reasons. And it's very important, right? Like, it's very, very important to do that and make sure that you can manage your health well, so that you are, excited and ready to return to work. So hopefully that was helpful, but please, again, who asked that question, please reach out if you would like to have a further chat about that. So those were wonderful questions. So the third one here, filling the gap, and this is where we're going to get a little bit specific. Let me check my time. Okay, we're great. So again, getting specific with them. How have you stayed in touch with the industry, or what have you done to prepare for re-entry, right? And so this is all about like how do you actually say these words? How do you talk about this? So say if you took time off to care for your family, and just saying, again, keeping it brief. Over the last 6 months, I've acted as the primary caretaker in my family. Grateful for having the ability to be there, right? So keeping it positive. For my family during that time, it was a difficult decision to take time away from working, but you always knew that it would be temporary, right? So letting them know, like, I knew that this was something that I really had to do, but I always knew that in the larger journey of my career that I would be returning to the workforce. And so this is a purposeful decision for you. And now, this is a really good reminder to proofread everything that you do. That's not what that's supposed, that last sentence is supposed to say. It's supposed to say, I'm now ready to refocus on my career and return back to work. So that's my lesson for today. I've worked with a lot of folks who have been in unfortunate layoff situations, where, this situation is, or the decision was not yours, unfortunately. And even if the layoff was your decision, a lot of times those situations are more of a forced layoff. And so the alternative was not great, right? And so how you can talk about this is a reason that makes, I think a lot of people can relate to, even if they don't say it out loud that they've been laid off. But last year my former company made some organizational changes which eliminated my position. This kind of stuff is really easy for most people to understand. And again, keeping the humanity in here, saying it was a really difficult time, right? Like, not like, oh, I was like happy to be out of work and I got to do all these other things I hadn't gotten to do before. But since my departure, I've done a lot of self-reflection, right? Like, so what have you been doing here? So I've taken some time to do some self-reflection on what I'm looking for in a career and which skills I can offer. Again, this is where you want to take it back to where you are today and why you're here. And reviewing the job description, it looks like my interests and strengths align with the needs of this position. And that's what leads me here today and why I'm looking forward to learning more about this opportunity, right? Keeping it brief, keeping it upbeat, even though that was probably not a great situation for that person. Some people take time off to upskill or reskill or do some education. And again, that's a pretty simple explanation, because typically that is related to what you're applying for, what you want to do. New parent, I certainly worked with a lot of these folks, and some people take a little bit of time off for family, to raise family. Some people take years, but whatever that is, hopefully you could maybe, if that's you in the situation, you could take some pointers here and talk about it. But putting a little bit of a gap in there, or a little bit of time frame in there. About 4 months ago, or a few years ago, I took some time off. I celebrated, again, keeping it positive, celebrated becoming a parent, made the decision to leave my former company because I wanted to fully focus on this chapter in my life. And again, talking about what have you been doing, right? So here's where you could talk about, this is just an example, but here's where you could talk about any strategic volunteering that you've done. What are those skills that you've gotten from managing a household? I'm not at the point, or okay, again, with the I really need to proofread my stuff. I'm now at a point where I'm ready to return to work, and after reviewing your about page, it seems like you really have a strong focus on work-life balance, right? And so again, bringing it back to why are you here? Why am I excited about this opportunity in this company? And, oh, sorry, did not mean to do that. And again, we had the question, the one example I didn't get to put in here was taking a break for your own personal health reasons. But again, I think, uh, when it's that kind of a situation, which has been happening more and more because people are, particularly with mental health, people are realizing the importance of really needing to take time to manage that, and feel like that they can manage a job and all the other parts of their life successfully, right? But when it comes to talking about taking time off for your own personal health reasons, again, they don't need specifics on what you were diagnosed with or what you're managing, but just talking about, and you can again even put the humanity in this and say, it was a difficult decision for me to take time off to manage my own health, but I realized that that was really necessary for me to be able to show up to work fully and presently and be a really good employee and good at what I do. Right. And so again, letting them know, in my time off, I have, I've utilized resources and I have worked with my medical team, and I am able, now to manage my health really well, and I'm able to return to work, right? And excited about it. So I think that's a really great way to talk about that. So lastly, of course, like, again, keep it brief and exit if you need to. I really hope that for all of your sakes, like, you never get into a situation where it's really uncomfortable for you, but like, particularly in an interview setting, like, always know that you have the ability to stop that interview and exit it and just say, I'm not comfortable with where the questions are going, or where the conversation is going, and I think I'm going to politely excuse myself from the interview. If your red flags are going off at that point, that's probably not an organization you want to work for, or somebody that you want to work for as well. So, because I think we all recognize that can be really hard to share, present company included. Considering that I almost cried in front of a VP once, and it's very personal. But I think it's also important to remember that the person on the other end of that interview, or the people on the other end of the interview, they have probably either experienced this themselves or know people and love people who have experienced this themselves. So remembering that we're all human, and it is important for them to know about this, and for you to speak confidently about it, but also get back to the point of why you're here, right? Why are you a good fit for this? How has this career break helped you get prepared to get back into the workforce? And I hope that you never feel like you need to shy away from your story or diminish it, because in the grand scheme of life and our career journey, this is just a part of it, right? This is just, I hope it was maybe just a blip on the radar in the grand scheme of your career and your life. And it does not mean that you are not ready to return to work. It doesn't mean that you are not going to be a really stellar employee. It just means that that's part of your story, right? And I hope that you guys find people on the other end of that interview that are really accepting of that. So that's my soapbox that I will stay on with that. And that is really the end of what I have today. I really hope that we have a question, so I'll get to that. So if you guys have any other questions as we wrap things up, please throw those in the Q&A. But I really hope that this was helpful in just getting started thinking about this, and maybe giving you even some really specific strategies on how to start really talking about your story. And I hope that it makes you feel a little bit more confident in your ability to do that. So the question we have here says, used to be in finance, took 20 years off to raise kids, no desire to return to finance. Okay, so we'll be starting fresh and without experience in some other field, and how to explain that you have no, excuse me, how to explain that you have no prior experience in this new field, but used to work at a very high level 20 years ago. That is a really great question. Excuse me. I think, again, like, how I would encourage you, right? First of all, I would love to have a one-on-one chat with you, but I think in general, just try to help give you an answer to this question. How is this part of your journey, right? um, your first stint in the workforce in finance, what did you learn from that? Right? Like, how was that helpful? Yes, that was 20 years ago, but there's probably still some really core or important skills that you've maintained from that time period in the workforce. So how was that helpful to you? How will that be helpful to you moving forward? And over 20 years is a really intense, long period of time. And it is, I think, very natural. And I hope that you can weave this into part of your story. I think it's really important to remember that 20 years changes people, right? Parenting changes people. And just the fact of growing as a human over those amount of years and maturing changes people, right? And so how has that contributed to your decision on when you get to that decision? Because you said you haven't made a decision on where you want to go yet, and that's perfectly fine. But when you get to that point, how has this career break influenced you to decide where you want to go? And so I think, hopefully that gives you something to start with. But really thinking good and hard about like how the flow of your journey so far, right? You had a career in finance. It taught you wonderful things. It gave you a really good base as an employee and these core skills. And it was at a high level. So you really do have experience with, this, and this, right? You took 20 years off to raise your family. Over that time period, you had the opportunity to do yada, 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 all of these things, these skills, and whatever else that you might have gained from that time period. And over 20 years of raising a family, I realized that, a career specifically in finance was not what I wanted to do when I returned to the workforce. This is what I want to do for these reasons. This is what's important to me. So hopefully that gives you some place to start with. We've got a couple more questions in here. So thank you for some really thoughtful questions. I love this. Let's see. Do you have an opinion about LinkedIn's new career break feature? Tried it briefly, didn't like the drop-down menu. Okay. I have not played around with that a ton, but I do know what you're talking about. Full-time parent, but I was also volunteer for 10 to 30 hours a week, which my resume reflects. My opinion about that feature of LinkedIn, which is the same about my opinion on a lot of things on LinkedIn and LinkedIn in general, is to do whatever works for you, right? I think, which I know is not a black and white answer and a little bit vague, but as with everything there, I think it's really a person, excuse me, a really personal decision about, is that going to help you in explaining your story to other people? And I think in some cases, with that feature on LinkedIn, it could be helpful. But again, it depends on I think how you talk about that career break and what you did. Because if I remember correctly, it allows you to sort of treat that as quote unquote like an experience that you put in. And so how are you talking about that? But the fact that you volunteered, could you also, I would recommend trying to put that volunteer experience in your LinkedIn profile as an experience as well. So hopefully that helps answer that question, Jessica. Let's see. Next question, the few active relaunch and returnship organizations, including iRelaunch, which I love iRelaunch. They have some really fantastic resources. Others that I recommend, not off the bat, Jessica, but happy to do some research. Honestly, I think that you kind of can't go wrong with iRelaunch. They have been around for years. The company is run, or the organization is run by a woman who returned to work after a long period out of the workforce. So it's certainly based on somebody that has been there and done that. So I love those, and I love the returnship. And I think a lot of larger companies like Amazon and many others, not to plug Amazon by any means, but a lot of companies like that are actually now offering formal returnship programs for folks that have taken several years or more break from the workforce. So again, I think companies are certainly much more open to that and recognizing the skills of people, with more seasoned professionals. This next question says, tech in particular is not forgiving, especially in Silicon Valley. Any tips for overcoming a barrier that people don't particularly want to change? 7 years, which is a lifetime in tech. So tech is, tech is an ever-changing field. When my husband works in IT and tech, and it's something that just it changes so frequently. I guess my first thought would be, has there been any opportunity for you to, sort of figure out what's going on currently in the field, pick up any of those skills that are going to be helpful that you might see jobs asking for? So again, thinking about like, what have you done? Have you had the ability to do anything in that time, in that 7 years, to keep up with the industry? And tips for overcoming the barrier, that I guess that would be the main one that comes to mind for me is, is there any possibility of you sort of reskilling or upskilling to keep up with what's been changing? But again, who asked this question, please reach out. I would be happy to chat with you more one-on-one about some specifics. Okay, so that looks like that is all. And I guess, well, somebody did ask, will the Zoom be posted afterwards? So this is being recorded. And so, we have one more question I'll get to in just a second. We are recording this. I do record all of them. And it takes a little bit of time because somebody smarter than me has to actually edit this and make it look good, and take out all my awkwardness. But it will be posted on the YouTube, the Alumni Relations YouTube page. Which again, I always send out for everyone who attended my webinar. I always send out some information with a link to that, as well as the slides for today. And if you want to, the person who asked me this question, you can email me specifically and I can send you the slides for next week because you said you can't attend. So happy to do that. Question, I'm also trying to overcome the tech barrier, 17 years. Are boot camps actually worthwhile? I would say give them a good, hard, long look. Again, tech IT is super broad in terms of like the skill level, what you can do, things like that. But I would definitely say give them a really good look. And so again, like, I'm not sure where you are, Kelly, or like geographically what you might be looking at, but I would be happy to chat with you. But I would definitely say, definitely look at them because they can be. Some of the ones that I have worked with in the past or know of more intimately in the past, they are very useful. What I would say, if you're looking at a boot camp and trying to evaluate is it worthwhile for you? What are the really specific skills and things that you will come out of that boot camp with, right? Is the money and the time investment going to be worth it for you? And there's a lot of ways that you can answer that question. But one thing, and I would say if you have, and this is for boot camps or any other kind of like continuing ed or grad program that you might be thinking about. If you have the opportunity, always see if you can get in touch with somebody like that worked with prospective students for that program or that boot camp, or somebody in admissions for them. See if you can have a quick chat with them, and you can ask them really specific questions that are going to help you make this decision. So questions like, what do your graduates do after this boot camp? What specific skills do you come out with? What kind of jobs do you expect that graduates from this boot camp are going to be going into? Do you have any support services for people who complete the boot camp? Like, I know the one specifically that I'm thinking about that works with, they're kind of a partner with University of Richmond. They have an entire team of career advisors and people for that boot camp that work with them on resumes and getting in touch with recruiters. So, seeing what the support services are. So I would say definitely worth a really good look if it's going to help give you some really good specific skills to get to the jobs that you want to get to. So hopefully that helps answer your question. Those were wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you all being here. And yep, in the interest of time, I think we'll go ahead and wrap things up because I haven't seen any more questions in a couple minutes. But I really appreciate you all being here. Thank you for taking your time with me today. Again, I will be doing a follow-up email with some more information. And in 2 weeks, again, on the 23rd, I'm going to be talking more specifically about some resume and cover letter things when you are getting back into the workforce and applying for those jobs. But in the meantime, again, my email is there, bshelton@richmond.edu. If you've got any questions or want to set up a one-on-one appointment, I would love to chat with you. So thanks again. Appreciate it. I hope you all have a wonderful day and take care of yourselves.